The Dreadnought hovered in the sky like a broken promise. I'd seen it my whole life, orbiting so low it seemed we could almost reach up and touch it. Its immense form blocked out stars, a rough silhouette carved in steel against Jakios's copper skies. People whispered about its purpose when they thought no one was listening. Stories about the old war, about why these massive machines still lingered long after their creators had forgotten how to wield them. None of the stories made sense, of course. All we knew was that they were there, and they didn't move. Except when they did. The last time a Dreadnought stirred, rumor had it swallowed an entire colony ship near Praxis 4. Nothing survived. The Council denied it, called it propaganda, but even they avoided issuing salvage orders for Praxis's orbit. So when my team tethered our rig to the Dreadnought hovering over Jakios, I felt its silent menace more keenly than I ever had before. "Jace, you seeing this?" Ria's voice came over comms, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Looks like some kind of outer hull plating. Weird alloy. Doesn't match the scans." She always sounded confident, even when the tension in her voice betrayed her. That's why she was second in command. She could fake calm better than I could. I adjusted the tether controls, watching as Ria floated along the ship's surface, a shadow against its luminescent plating. It didn't shine so much as shimmer, like a heat mirage. "Scans are only as good as our gear," I replied. "Which is to say, not very good." Thane grunted from his corner of the rig's cockpit, bent over a jury-rigged console. "You'd think the Council could spare a halfway decent scanner, considering they take half our haul every month." "They'd take it all if they could," Ria muttered. "They only take half because we're not dead yet," I said. "Let's keep it that way." The rig shuddered as Ria's tether drilled into the Dreadnought's hull, securing her in place. I watched her helmet cam feed, the curved metal surface rippling like quicksilver as her plasma cutter went to work. Sparks flared and died in the void as she carved a neat square. "Through the first layer," she said. "No sign of internal circuitry. Moving to—" Her voice cut off abruptly. "Ria," I said. "Ria, report." Silence. Thane muttered something and yanked at a panel of wires. "It's the comms," he said. "The rig's signal booster can't handle interference from whatever this alloy is. Probably why the Council hasn't sent anyone up here before." Probably wasn't good enough. I pushed off from my seat and grabbed a helmet. "Keep the rig steady. I'm going out." "Great idea," Thane said. "Double the radiation exposure for no reason." "Ria's out there alone. I'm not sitting here waiting to see if she cuts herself loose." He sighed, but he didn't argue. That was as close to approval as I was going to get. The airlock hissed as I stepped out, the tether on my suit reeling me toward the Dreadnought. The closer I got, the more its sheer scale overwhelmed me. Our salvage rig was tiny, a mosquito clinging to its hull. The surface was a maze of interlocking panels, their edges fused seamlessly, like a puzzle too perfect for human hands to assemble. I spotted Ria's plasma cutter still glowing against the hull, a neat square etched where she'd broken through. Her tether dangled loose, but there was no sign of her. My helmet lights swept across the hull, catching on the outline of her booted feet just beyond the cut panel. She'd crawled inside. Of course she had. I followed, my tether locking onto hers as I squeezed through the opening. My suit's HUD blinked with warnings about elevated radiation levels, but nothing lethal. Yet. The corridor stretched out before me, illuminated by strips of light along the walls. I felt a faint vibration underfoot, like the machine was alive and dreaming. Ria crouched a few meters ahead, her helmet tilted toward a recessed panel that glowed blue. "You're insane," I said, my voice sharp in her comms. "We're not even supposed to be in here." She turned, her visor catching the light. "And miss this? Look at it, Jace. It's pristine." She wasn't wrong. The panel she was examining was something we had never come across before. The machines we salvaged were always degraded, broken, their guts spilling cables and rust. This was untouched, its surface smooth. I stepped closer. The panel flickered, displaying shapes I couldn't decipher. It wasn't text, not exactly. Patterns of light shifted and rearranged themselves, reacting to our presence. "You're going to tell me this doesn't scare the hell out of you?" I asked. Her voice was quiet. "Everything out here scares the hell out of me. That doesn't mean we run." "Could have fooled me." She shot me a look through her visor, but didn't argue. Instead, she pressed her hand flat against the panel. The light shifted, becoming brighter, sharper. I felt something stir in my chest, a pull I couldn't explain. "Rhea," I started, but the words died in my throat. The panel blinked, then slid away to reveal a recessed compartment. Inside was a device, a black sphere about the size of my fist. I felt the pull again, stronger this time. "What the hell is it?" she whispered. I reached for it without thinking, my gloved hand closing around the sphere. I felt my mind stretch, unraveling into something incomprehensible. Images flashed. War, fire, the earth cracking open beneath a burning sky. Then it was gone, and I was on my knees, gasping for air. "Jace!" Rhea's voice broke through the haze. She was shaking me, her hands gripping my shoulders. "What happened? Talk to me." I blinked, the images still flickering at the edges of my vision. "I don't know. It's like it showed me something." We made it back to the rig in silence, the sphere secured in a containment case. Thane cursed when he saw us, muttering about reckless scavengers and how he wasn't paid enough for this. I let him rant. My mind was still unraveling, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. That night, I didn't sleep. The sphere sat locked in the case. I found myself drawn to it, unable to resist the pull. When the others were asleep, I opened the case and connected the sphere to a power source. It came alive instantly, its surface glowing with complicated designs. Data flooded my HUD, fragments of an alien language interspersed with images, war machines marching across landscapes, cities consumed by fire. I saw death counts in the billions, entire worlds erased. My head pounded as the images coalesced into a single message. Verdict: overdue. The sphere went dark, and I was left trembling in the cockpit, staring at the thing that had just rewritten everything I thought I knew about the machines that hung above us. I wasn't sure what scared me more, that the Dreadnoughts were alive or that they'd been waiting for us to notice. The weight of the sphere stayed with me even after I locked it away again. I could feel it, not just through the metal of the containment case, but somewhere deeper, beneath my skin. It wasn't a physical sensation exactly, it was a presence, something that aligned with the rhythm of my thoughts. Or maybe it guided them. I sat in the cockpit, staring out at the glowing ruins of Jakios below. The planet looked peaceful from up here, but I knew better. Down there, every moment was a fight, against hunger, radiation, the toxic weather, or each other. Up here, tethered to the relic of an ancient war, survival felt just as fragile. But now there was something else. A weight. A responsibility I didn't ask for and didn't want. When Rhea and Thane woke, I didn't tell them what I'd seen. Not all of it. I said the sphere was some kind of interface. A data archive, maybe, and that it contained fragments of the Dreadnought's history. That much was true, but the rest? The flashes of judgment, the weight of those death counts. I couldn't bring myself to share that. Rhea didn't press. She was preoccupied with getting us back planetside before the Council flagged our unauthorized excursion. Salvaging the Dreadnoughts was technically legal, but only under strict Council oversight, and we'd broken more than a few regulations to get up here. Thane grumbled the whole way down, muttering about fried circuits and how we were lucky the rig hadn't torn apart in orbit. We landed on the outskirts of Jasios's largest settlement, Ardent Cross. The name was more hopeful than the reality, a vast collection of crumbling buildings, half-repaired infrastructure, and overcrowded markets. Smoke hung low over the streets, mixing with the ever-present copper haze. We maneuvered the rig into our usual berth, a rusted docking platform overseen by a bored attendant who barely glanced at us. "Unload the salvage," Rhea said, tugging off her gloves. "I'll handle the council forms." She gave me a look before she left, something between concern and frustration. I waved her off, pretending not to notice. Thane and I worked in silence, hauling the day's scraps into the storage bay. The sphere stayed locked in its case, tucked away where no one would think to look. At least, that was the plan. I'd just finished securing the last load when the first visitor arrived. Venric Auric stepped into the bay with the kind of confidence that only someone with nothing to lose could pull off. His robes, faded and patched but still bearing the insignia of the scribes of continuance, drew curious glances from the dock workers. "Jace Ven," he said, his voice as steady as his gait. "May I have a word?" I didn't trust the scribes. They claimed to preserve the knowledge of the past, but most of what they collected was fragmented at best and fabricated at worst. Still, Venric had a reputation for being sharper than most, and his presence here wasn't a coincidence. "You just had one," I said, folding my arms. "What do you want?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "To help you understand what you found." I stiffened. He couldn't know. The sphere was locked away, and I hadn't said a word about it to anyone outside the team. "It's written all over your face," he said, tilting his head. "The way you're standing, the way you look at the ship, like it might collapse under the weight of what's hidden inside it. You found something up there, didn't you?" "Even if I did," I said, "why would I tell you?" "Because I'm the only one who'll tell you the truth." I snorted. "And what truth is that?" "That the Dreadnoughts aren't relics, they're waiting." The words hit harder than I expected, and I struggled to keep my expression neutral. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't know what you found, but I know it's important. And I know the Council will bury it the moment they find out." A second voice cut through the tension. "Then maybe we shouldn't let them find out." Rhea stood in the doorway, her hands on her hips. She looked calm, but her tone carried an edge. "Auric, was it? You've got a knack for making friends in all the wrong places." Venric raised his hands, palms out. "I'm not your enemy. All I want is to ensure that whatever you've uncovered doesn't disappear into the Council's vaults." Rhea glanced at me. "Jace, you want to tell me why this guy knows about our haul?" I shook my head. "He doesn't. He's guessing." "An educated guess," Venric said, unfazed. "But fine, I'll leave you to it. Just remember, the Council isn't as blind as you think." He left without another word, disappearing into the haze of the settlement. Rhea waited until he was out of earshot before turning to me. "You've been acting strange since we left orbit," she said. "What's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything, but the memory of the interface's judgment, the overwhelming certainty of it, kept my mouth shut. Instead, I gave her the same half-truth I'd told myself. "It's nothing," I said. "Just a lot to process." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "Fine, but if you're hiding something, I'll find out." I spent the rest of the day trying to avoid the sphere. I threw myself into routine maintenance, checked in with Thane about the rig's repairs, and even ventured into the market to restock supplies. But no matter how far I tried to distance myself, I couldn't shake the pull. That night, when the settlement had quieted, I gave in. The sphere was cold against my palm, its surface unnervingly smooth, like it had been polished by hands that didn't know imperfection. As I powered it on, patterns of light began to snake across its surface. Not random, but deliberate, almost playful, as if the sphere were testing me. The lights locked into a structure, geometric grids that looked almost familiar but were maddeningly incomprehensible. My interface activated the moment I connected. The synchronization wasn't gentle this time. It was as though the sphere latched onto my mind and dragged it inward. I didn't black out, but it felt close, a vertiginous tug that left me unmoored. The world around me shifted. I wasn't floating, nor was I standing. There was no orientation. I was surrounded by towering constructs of light, shimmering and vast, their surfaces rippling with liquid patterns. Each tower seemed to store something monumental. When I focused on one, it fractured into shards, and those shards became images. I didn't see the images. I was inside them. I was a soldier on a burning world, choking on ash as towering machines bore down from the sky. A child cowering in a gutted city as fire consumed the horizon. A commander screaming orders as rows of ships shattered against an impossible foe. The memories were raw and immediate. They weren't filtered through time, they were alive as if I had slipped into the skin of their owners. I could smell the blood and smoke, I could feel the blistering heat, and I could taste the overwhelming bitterness of loss. Then the light towers reformed, and I was pulled forward to something deeper. Numbers cascaded around me like a storm of symbols. Death tolls, battle statistics, resource consumption, planetary coordinates. The scale was staggering. Billions of lives erased, entire systems devoured. Yet the sphere didn't mourn. The cold neutrality of the data was more unnerving than the destruction itself. It wasn't cruel, it simply was. And then I felt a presence. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, but a vast intelligence brushing against my mind. It wasn't invasive or hostile. It was something worse, indifferent.
Judgment overdue.
The resonance struck me like a blow, vibrating through my skull. The words weren't spoken, yet I felt them as if they had been carved into the space around me. With them came an overwhelming sense of purpose. The Dreadnoughts weren't idle ruins or remnants of a forgotten war. They were mechanisms of arbitration built with a single purpose: to weigh civilizations against a standard I couldn't yet understand. And they were waiting. For what or for whom remained unclear. The connection shattered suddenly, and I gasped as my surroundings snapped back into focus. The cockpit lights seemed too bright, the air too thin. The sphere's glow had dimmed again, its surface returning to a passive state, but the sense of its awareness lingered. I didn't just understand the sphere now, I felt it. The machine wasn't dormant. It was alive in ways I had no vocabulary for. And the Dreadnoughts? They weren't relics or artifacts, they were players in a game so beyond us that I could barely grasp its rules. I barely had time to catch my breath before the comm unit activated. "Jace," Rhea said, sharp and urgent. "We've got a problem." I bolted to the rig's monitoring station where Rhea stood rigid, staring at the external screens. A small convoy of council vehicles was threading through the narrow streets of Ardent Cross, their searchlights carving paths through the haze. "They're coming straight for the platform," she said, her voice tight. I leaned in, my stomach knotting. The convoy's lead vehicle had the insignia of the Council of Salvage stamped on its side. A black sunburst against a field of rust. They couldn't know about the sphere. They couldn't. But as I watched their approach, the way they moved with purpose, I realized the truth. They knew. And they weren't leaving without it. Rhea's hand was on my shoulder, squeezing tight enough to hurt. "We need to move." I stared at the monitor, watching the council convoy wind its way through the streets of Ardent Cross. The vehicles were large, armored, and uncomfortably well maintained for this part of the world. Each one bore the black sunburst insignia, bold and unmistakable. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take. "They can't know," I said, half to myself. "They do," Rhea responded. "And if you don't have a plan in the next 10 seconds, I'm making one for you." Thane shuffled into the rig's cramped command station, his face dark with grease and his usual scowl. "What's this about? Why are the council's watchdogs sniffing around?" "They're here for the sphere," Rhea said, already moving. "Help me pack it up." Thane blinked. "You're serious? You brought that thing here?" "It's not up for debate," she shot back. "We move or we're dead." I followed them into the storage bay, my thoughts a mess of half-formed plans and creeping panic. The sphere sat in its containment case, but I felt it in the air like a hidden force. It was waiting, and now so was I. For what? I didn't know. "Where are we going to take it?" Thane asked as he hauled the case onto a hover sled. "The council controls every port for miles." "Not every port," Rhea said. She motioned for Thane to follow her and turned to me. "There's an old freight hub in the Blackridge zone. Nobody uses it anymore. but the mag rails still run. We can stow the sphere there and regroup. You want to hide it in one of the most unstable areas on the planet? I said, incredulous. Do you have a better idea? Her tone cut sharper than usual, but I couldn't blame her. We were out of options and she knew it. The rig shuddered as we moved the sled down the exit ramp, the quiet whir of its anti-gravs blending with the distant clamour of the settlement. Outside, Ardent Cross buzzed with its usual chaos. Vendors shouted over one another. Drones darted between sagging buildings, and the copper haze hung low, stifling the light. But it wasn't the usual chaos that had my attention. It was the convoy. The first of the Council's vehicles pulled into view just as we reached the edge of the docking platform. Uniformed enforcers spilled out, their rifles slung low but ready. One of them, taller than the rest, his face obscured by a reflective visor, turned toward us and paused. His hand went to his comms, and I knew we were out of time. We maneuvered the sled into the narrow alleys behind the platform, its anti-gravs creating a soft sound as it drifted just above the ground. The enforcers' shouts echoed closer, their boots pounding against the pavement. The sled wasn't built for speed. Its propulsion system sputtered with every sharp turn, struggling to keep up under the weight of the containment case. It wobbled slightly, its stabilizers taxed beyond their limits, making every second feel like an eternity. A shot rang out, sharp and unmistakable. The impact sparked against a wall inches from my head. "They're shooting at us!" Thane shouted, incredulous. "They're not going to ask nicely," Rhea said. "Keep moving!" We cut through an abandoned market, its stalls long since looted, and ducked into the ruins of an old tram station. The sled's anti-gravs whined as Thane yanked it up a broken stairwell. Rhea covered our retreat, her sidearm drawn, though I knew she wouldn't fire unless she had no other choice. The Council didn't take kindly to resistance. By the time we reached the upper level, my lungs were burning, and the sound of the enforcers had faded into the distance. Thane collapsed against the wall, glaring at the sphere as if it were to blame for all of this. "This thing better be worth it," he muttered. "It's not about worth," I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. "It's about what happens if they get it." Rhea frowned. "And what happens if they don't? You think you can just keep it hidden forever? This isn't salvage, Jace. It's bigger than that." "I know it is." I connected to it again. "It's not just a part of the Dreadnoughts. It's a key, or maybe a trigger. Something tied to their purpose. Whoever built them are gone. But the system is still running." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "Running how?" "It's gathering data," I said slowly, the realization dawning even as I spoke. "Evaluating everything. Watching us, all of us. It's waiting for humanity to show its worth." "Show its worth?" Thane asked. "To what? A bunch of ancient machines?" "To the program," I said. "It's not about a person or a group, it's about us, as a species." "Judgment," Rhea said flatly, and the word hung in the air like smoke. I nodded. "That's what it's looking for, the sphere. It's just one part of it, but it's tied to the whole network, and somehow we've triggered something. Maybe by connecting to it. Maybe just by being here." I stepped out onto the platform. The Dreadnought loomed through the copper haze, its massive form sharper than I'd ever seen it. The surface rippled with light, patterns flowing across its hull like a heartbeat. It wasn't idle anymore. It was active, aware. "What's happening?" Rhea asked as she joined me, her voice low but tense. "It's awakening," I said, barely able to force the words out. I couldn't look away. The Dreadnought towered, its form dominating the sky. Patterns of light rippled across its surface, detailed and planned, like a heartbeat magnified 1,000-fold. This was no malfunction, no anomaly. The machine was waking up and it was watching us. Rhea stood beside me, her breath audible through the stillness. "Jace, what does it mean? What happens when it fully... whatever this is?" I shook my head, unable to find words. For all the moments I'd spent tethered to the sphere, glimpsing fragments of its purpose. I still couldn't grasp the whole of it. Not fully. But there was one truth I couldn't ignore anymore. "It's not just about us," I said quietly. "It's bigger. All of humanity." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue. She understood as well as I did. The Dreadnought wasn't acting on some localized grievance or isolated incident. Its purpose, its judgment, spanned every colony, every world we had dared to inhabit. And now, after centuries of silence, it was carrying out that purpose. The low vibration from earlier returned. It shook the station beneath us, shaking loose fragments from the walls and sending tremors through the structure. The sled carrying the sphere jolted violently. Thane stumbled into view, his face pale as he gripped a nearby beam for support. "What's it doing?" he asked, his voice nearly drowned out by the growing noise. "It's signaling," I said. The certainty of my words scared me. "Calling to the others." "What others?" Rhea demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. I turned to her, my throat dry. "All of them." This Dreadnought wasn't unique. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, scattered across human-occupied worlds. Every planet we called home had one, watching silently. And now this one was waking them all. As if to confirm my fear, the sky shimmered. The lights intensified, streaks of energy coursing outward from the Dreadnought and vanishing into the atmosphere. One by one, other Dreadnoughts across the galaxy were coming online. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their awakening, as if the sphere's resonance had extended through me. The vibration deepened again, and the patterns on the Dreadnought's hull shifted into sharper focus. It wasn't just active, it was fully operational. The sphere's containment case burst open, its locks disengaging with a sharp hiss. The sphere itself hovered into the air, glowing brighter than I'd ever seen it. Its surface displayed patterns, the complex designs moving too quickly for my eyes to follow. And then it spoke. The voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. A single, chilling word resonated through the platform, through the station, through the very air.
"Verdict."
The light from the sphere flared, blinding us for a moment. When it dimmed, I could see its patterns had settled into a singular design, a glyph, stark and final. My heart sank as the voice came again, delivering the judgment we had unknowingly been racing toward all this time.
"Unworthy."
The word didn't feel like a sentence, it felt like a death knell. Rhea staggered, her face pale. Thane was muttering something, a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell. My own mind struggled to process what I'd just heard. All the flashes I'd seen through the sphere, the glimpses of ancient destruction, the cold calculus of loss. It all led here. This wasn't about forgiveness or redemption. It never had been. The Dreadnought above us began to move. For centuries, it had hung motionless in the sky, an artifact of a forgotten war. Now it ascended, its massive form rising higher into orbit. Its lights intensified, casting harsh shadows across the settlement below. From this height, Jakios's fragile infrastructure was laid bare. Cracked roads, crumbling towers, the thin veneer of civilization barely holding together. The people in the settlement must have seen it too. Cries and shouts rose from the streets, a chorus of fear and confusion. Drones buzzed erratically through the sky, and I could hear the crackle of emergency broadcasts cutting through the chaos. But none of it would matter, not anymore. "What does this mean?" Rhea asked, her voice shaking. "What's it going to do?" I stared at the sphere, still hovering in the air. The answer came to me in pieces, each one heavier than the last. "They weren't built to negotiate," I said. "They're not arbiters, they're executioners." Rhea's eyes widened, but she didn't respond. We both understood the gravity of what was happening. The Dreadnoughts weren't waiting for humanity to plead its case. The case had already been made, centuries of war, exploitation and decay, all observed in cold, impartial detail. And now the sentence was being carried out. The first pulse hit moments later. It wasn't visible, but its effects were immediate. The ground beneath us shuddered violently, throwing us off balance. Across the settlement, power grids failed in rapid succession, plunging entire districts into darkness. I could hear the screams now, carried on the wind, as people scrambled for safety that didn't exist. Thane grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "We can't stay here. If they're really going to..." "They are," I said, cutting him off. "And there's nowhere to go." Another pulse followed, this one stronger. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't describe. The Dreadnought's lights pulsed in time with the waves, each one rippling outward like a death sentence written across the sky. I turned to Rhea, who was staring at the horizon. "We always thought we had more time," she said quietly. "Even when things were falling apart, we thought we'd fix it somehow, that it would all balance out in the end." "We didn't think it mattered," I said. "Not enough." She looked at me, her expression grim but steady. "Maybe we deserved this." I didn't know how to respond. Maybe she was right. Maybe humanity had sealed its own fate long before we ever touched the sphere, before we even knew the Dreadnoughts were watching. Our mistakes weren't new, and neither was the cost. The third pulse hit, and this time, the ground cracked. The platform beneath us groaned, its supports buckling under the strain. I reached out instinctively, grabbing Rhea's arm as the structure tilted dangerously. The sled tipped, the empty containment case clattering to the ground. Thane cursed, scrambling for balance. "We can't just stand here," he said. "There's got to be something we can do." "There isn't," I said. The words were bitter, but they were true. This wasn't a problem we could solve with ingenuity or bravery. It was a reckoning, vast and unstoppable, and we were just as powerless as anyone else. I could see glimmers in the sky now, signals from other dreadnoughts responding in kind. They were all waking up, their vast network aligning to execute the verdict. The platform groaned again, and I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. I turned to Rhea, meeting her gaze. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for, bringing the sphere back, failing to understand its purpose sooner, or simply being part of a species that had reached this point. Her expression softened just slightly. "Don't be. This was bigger than us. It always was." The fourth pulse hit, and this time the platform collapsed entirely. I felt the ground give way beneath me, and for a moment, there was nothing but the rush of air and the roar of destruction. I caught a glimpse of the settlement below, fires spreading through the streets as buildings crumbled under the strain. Then the light came, blinding and final, as the Dreadnought's energy built to its crescendo. I didn't need to see the outcome. I already knew it. Humanity's time was over,